All right, we are on the bottom of Kuf Memchet 148, and we'll move into 149 today. We are continuing discussion about transactions on Shabbat, first in relation to Korban Pesach, and then other matters. That will get into some related ideas, but we're going to end with a very interesting Agadah about Nebuchadnezzar and the punishments that he got. So a lot to look forward to. We start, V'chen Erev Pesach, the Mishnah says that Erev Pesach, if it's on Shabbat, that means you have to prepare the Korban Pesach on Shabbat, which is okay. That's the date that you have to do it. And if you didn't already designate an animal before Shabbat, then you can go and you can join in by leaving a talit with someone who has a Pesach, and that way you say, here's my share. So it's kind of like buying in. And it says, and the Mishnah said, after Yom Tov, and you finish the transaction and you figure out how much the monetary value is. So you can't really do monetary transactions because you might come to right, but in a roundabout way, sometimes you're allowed. So on this Mishnah, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Magdish Adam Pischo b'Shabbat v'chagigato b'Yom Tov. He says a general thing about being Magdish. That means taking an animal and saying, this is going to be my Korban Pesach. You could do that on Shabbat if it's the 14th of Nisan. Or you could take a Chagiga and say, this is going to be my Korban Chagiga. Chagiga you bring on the holiday on Yom Tov itself. And you're allowed to designate. Okay, that's Rabbi Yochanan's thesis. We're going to try to prove it in a couple of ways. The proofs are going to be rejected and we're going to have to shift it slightly. But in the end it will stand. Proof number one is from our Mishnah. נאמר מסייע ל, וכן ערב פסח בירושלים שחל להיות בשבת, מניח טליתו אצלו, ונותן את פסחו, ועושה מה חשבון לאחר יום טוב. Our Mishnah said that if you have to prepare your Korban Pesach on Shabbat, and you didn't have one from before, you give someone a talit, and he will include you in his company. So this sounds like he didn't have a Korban Pesach before, and now he buys in, and they're designating it on Yom Tov. So this looks like a proof for Rabbi Yochanan. Although the Mishnah is only talking about the monetary aspect of buying it, right, buying into it, we can infer also that they're making hekdesh that day. That people are getting together and designating an animal, right? So is that a good proof for Rabbi Yochanan? No, not necessarily a good proof. Could be talking about someone who already has a Korban Pesach from before, and he has a group of 10 people, and then one more person comes and says, I want to join also. So that's allowed in terms of the monetary thing, if he does the talit workaround. But the point is that the animal is already hekdesh from before Yom Tov. So there's no proof here that you can make it designated on Yom Tov itself. Right. Wait, but maybe you could prove from here because you're not allowed to register for an animal on Yom Tov to start with. So how is he allowed to do it here? Must be a case here where every year they join together. It's the same group. They always get together. And this year he just happened not to fill out the form to tell him. It's like, if every Friday, two people in business, they buy a lottery ticket. Each one puts in $1 every Friday. And then one Friday, the guy forgot to put $1, right? And the other guy wins. So you say, oh, and he doesn't get it. And since they do it every week, they know that, of course, we're going to join in together. And so here, too, it's as if you already joined in. It's implicitly, even if you didn't say it. But can you do the so maybe we can prove it from this Rabbi Yochanan statement. You can go to a shepherd, and he has you pick a sheep, and you pick one, and you could be Makadish, and then you have an animal. You're doing that on Shabbat. So it looks like, see, that's a proof for Rabbi Yochanan, isn't it? No, same thing here. Since he always goes to the same shepherd and always gets one, it's as if it's already designated. But the statement that Rabbi Yochanan says, Makdish. So we know he's designating it today. Hekdesh Eilui Midrabanan. Now that means he's just verbalizing it officially, and that's only necessary Midrabanan. But Midoraita, implicit Hekdesh was enough. So there's no proof from here yet that we can actually do it on Shabbat itself. So now we challenge Rabbi Yochanan. We couldn't prove it. Now we actually challenge him. Mi abba Rabbi Yochanan hachi, amar Rabbi Yochanan. Halacha kistam Mishnah. Utanan. לא מקדישים, ולא מעריכים, ולא מחרימים, ולא מגביהים תרומות ומעשרות, כל אלו ביום טוב אמרו, קל וחומר בשבת. This is a Mishnah in Shabbat that's listing, among other, the Shavut, things that you can't do, and other things that you can't do that are mitzvot, but are not necessary. So you can't make something hekdesh. Right? If I want to donate my table to the Bet HaMikdash, I'm not allowed to do that. Or make an evaluation and say, I'm going to donate my worth. You can't do that. You can't do that on Shabbat, or make something chedim, or make it to gavoa. All different kinds of donations to the Mod Masrot. All these you're not allowed to do on Yom Tov. All the more so on Shabbat. So there you go. You're not allowed to make akdishin. You're not allowed to make something ekdesh. So, for example, you can't designate an animal. That's Rabbi Yochanan said you can. He's going against the Mishnah. So, and he says halacha kistam Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan always says that, and that is a stam Mishnah. So what do we do with this? We have a very elegant solution. La kashya kan bechabot shekabua lahem zeman kan bechabot she'en kabua lahem zeman. One, Rabbi Yochanan is talking about an animal that you have to designate it today because Pesach is today or Chagigah is today. Right? You have to do it. Now, otherwise you're going to lose out. So if you have to do it today, then you're allowed. But the Mishnah in Mesa was talking about just any time I feel like giving a donation. A voluntary donation, but I could give it another day. If you can give it another day, then you're not allowed to do it on Yom Tov. So this is seems like a very simple solution, and in fact, all the other proofs that we had before were talking about also, certainly this one was talking about on the holiday, right? Be Yom Tov. So, this could have solved all the other cases as well. All right, certainly our Mishnah. I didn't have to go and say that it's talking about a case where he already had in mind. He already implicitly part of it. You don't really have to do all that, but we do go through that exercise, which seems to imply that in the end we'll follow Rabbi Yochanan, but in a more limited way. That that by the end, yes, you can make something hekdesh, but it has to be a day that it has to be done that day, and also has to be some case where you implicitly are already part of a group, and then you're just verbalizing the hekdesh. Okay, I think that's why the Gemara is going through that exercise to get to that end. All right, next Mishnah has a bunch of cases. The cases seem a little bit enigmatic until the Gemara is going to expound them, but we'll try to make it clear. Moneh adam et orchotav et pirotav mipiv, avalo min haketav. You're having guests over on Shabbat. You're going to make a nice formal meal, so you can count the guests off and count the appetizers in your head. You want to see, do I have enough appetizers for each guest? So you're going through your head, I'm inviting Joe, I'm inviting, right, and all that. But you can't read it from a list. You wrote a list, it's not allowed. Why? We'll see. One of the reasons is you may come to erase it. You're going to say, oh, wait, I invited that guy? I didn't want to invite that guy. I don't have enough food. Okay, and I'm going to erase him from my list. And so that's a danger. So therefore, you have to do it mipiv. I like how they say by heart. We say, I'll live. But they say, like we say, Torah shebe'al peh. So also mipiv, they thought of memorizing is like reciting with your mouth. Okay, so that's halacha number one. Then mefis adam im banav im bnei beto al hashulchan ובלבד שלא יתכוון לעשות מנה גדולה וכנגד מנה קטנה. A person can make a lottery, draw lots for the member of his household who's going to get which piece, right? I mean, we're used to having plenty of food, enough for everybody. We have Friday night meal, we have leftovers till Thursday, right? But for many people, and certainly back then, it was like just enough pieces of chicken for one for each person. And who's going to get the big one, who's going to get the leg, and who's going to get the small one. And so rather than everybody fighting about it, they would draw lots. And so you get this piece, you get that piece. So a person is allowed to do that for his family members. As long as he doesn't purposely give someone a big one and someone a small one, they'll be measuring. Okay, we'll see more about that. ומטילים חלשים על הקודשים ביום טוב, אבל לא על המנות. And that's talking about Kohanim can cast lots for kodashim. They're going to eat the portions that they're allowed to eat from a korban, and so they cast a lot rather than fighting. I want the liver. No, they do that on Yom Tov. But what they cannot do is they cannot make a lottery for things that are not hekdesh. Right? That seems to mean what by manot. If it's just regular food that someone donated and not kadosh food, not hekdesh, then they can't do it. The difference is that for hekdesh, by doing the lottery, they're showing how eager they all are to fulfill a mitzvah of eating hekdesh. Whereas if it's just regular food, there's no mitzvah, then there's problems doing that for sure on Shabbat.
Rabbi,
okay. Yeah.
Why do we have different languages here for the two lotteries? It's like they're
and halashin. Yeah.
It's like matilin halashin as opposed to just mefis.
Yeah. Good question. The Gemara later is going to analyze this word halashin, where it comes from. It's going to reconnect it back to Nebuchadnezzar, we'll see. So perhaps there was a specific system that the Kohanim used that this describes, whereas a person on his table will just, pick a straw. But I'm just a guess. Okay. My ta'ama, what is the reason for the first halakha that you cannot have a list of guests and you have to only say it by heart? 2 reasons. Rabbevai Amar, Gezerah Shema Yimchok. Abaye Amar, Gezerah Shema Yikra, Ishtare Hejot. First reason is that you may come to erase. Right? You see a guest there, I don't have enough food, and you're going to start erasing. Technically, erasing, it would be a derabanan because it's just destroying. It's only d'oraita if you're erasing because you want room to write someone else. Although technically, maybe you want to erase someone and then come to write someone else. Okay, but either way, that's not allowed. And Abaye says, no, it's a different reason. If you start reading a list of names, then you're going to go start reading business documents, contracts, letters, all kinds of things that are not appropriate to read on Shabbat. Are you thinking of names? Oh, that guy. Wait a second. Doesn't he owe me money? And you're going to go start looking in your files for something else, and you're going to start thinking about business. So therefore, don't read anything that's not Torah. Okay. My benaihu. What's the difference, the practical difference between these 2 opinions? Ika benaihu dichtab akotel umidle. Difference between them is if I write on a wall up high, right? I write the list of names all the way up high in the wall. It's hard to get there. So I'm not going to come to erase it because it's all the way up high, right? Can't even reach it. However, if I read that, I may, in fact, come to read business letters. And so this would be a practical difference. If you're worried about erasing, I'm not going to erase it, it's very high. If you say I might come then to read other things with people's names on it and documents, then I would worry. So that's a practical difference, right? Okay, we're going to go through a few different possibilities of what would be a practical difference. We're going to reject a few, and then we're going to actually come back to the same one. So we'll keep it in mind. Hold on. The one who says, I'm afraid that he might come to erase, why isn't he also afraid that he might come to read business documents? I mean, it's another perfectly good reason. It's not like one should reject the other. And furthermore, the Shema Yimchok La Hashinan, you're not afraid he's going to race because it's up high. We have a Braita that rejects this idea. Regarding the Mishnah that says you should not read from a lamp light on Shabbat because then you may fix the wick if it's getting dim. And so it's not allowed. Rabba added to that and said, even if it's 2 stories high, even if it's 10 stories high, and you can't reach it, it's still not allowed. Once we make a law, we make a blanket law. And therefore, applying it here also, okay, in this case, you wrote it high up and you can't reach it. But it should be the same principle. If you're worried about people erasing it, then you should say it's prohibited no matter what. So even that person should agree that we would worry about erasing it. So let's try something else that would be a practical difference that they would really agree with. Ela ika benaihu dechatav akotel umitate. I was talking about writing on the wall, even if it's low down. If you're afraid of erasing, then it's the same thing. You are afraid. But the other one, that person will not worry in this case because a wall is different from a document. Because you read something on the wall, you're not going to go out and it's not going to remind you of papers because it's two different realms. And so it's different enough that you'll be reminded. Okay, so is this good enough? We question this. The one who says, I'm afraid you might read business documents, certainly he would also be afraid that you might erase. So he should still prohibit it for the other reason. We want to look for a reason that one will apply to one and won't apply to the other. If you engrave the list of names of guests on a tablet or a board, a pinax. This is a wax tablet. Kids would use it in school or in business. It's wax you engrave on the wax. And then when you're done, you just smooth it and it's easy to erase. So if you wrote the list on that, because that erasing is not really erasing. The writing is so temporary, right? It's just like writing in sand, and you just smooth it out. So you don't have to worry that if you see a name you don't want, you're going to come to erase because that erasing is not even called erasing. So now, if you're worried in general about erasing, if it was on regular paper, in this case, you wouldn't have to worry. If you're worried about reading business documents, well, then it's the same. You're going to read business documents. Hold on. This is still not good enough. The person who doesn't care, or who's not worried in this case about erasing, shouldn't he also be worried about, shouldn't he be worried about you might read a business document? So, you didn't take care of that problem. We're kind of assuming that they're both agreeing that for both reasons. Maybe he will say that a tablet is different enough from a document that you are not going to mix up one medium for the other. And there, now we have a good case because we solve both problems. A wax tablet, you don't have to worry about erasing it, and it's a different enough medium from paper. And so that opinion would say that's perfectly fine. But here we still have a problem because we're b'raita exactly against it. It says, וכמה מנות עתיד להניח לפניהם מכתב שעל גבי הכותל, אבל לא מכתב שעל גבי טבלה ופנקס. It says explicitly that you can count how many guests are going to be sitting inside and how many outside and how much food you're going to have for each one, and you could do all that, and you can write it on the wall, but you cannot write it on the tablet or the pinax. There you go. So you can't write it on the pinax. So this can't be a case that would be okay. And what is this case that you're writing on the pin? How are you writing it? In ink? If what's the difference? But if you're writing in ink, then what's the difference between on the wall or on the pinax, right? Because it's still writing, it'll still be erasing. And it must be that you in fact are engraving in the pinax. And still, still it's not allowed with the pinax. So although that theoretically works, this case, we have a source against it. Rather, we go all the way back to the beginning. Rather, it is on the wall and it's all the way up high. And the question that we had before was from the law of Rabbah. Rabbah said even if the lamp is all the way up high, we still don't allow you to use it for reading, even though practically you can't go and get it. And that's what we said. We asked over here. If you write up high, we should still say it's not allowed. But that opinion of Rabbah is only one opinion, and it's in fact a machloket Tanaim in this regard. The Tanya. This is a parallel to Mishnah that you can say the list of guests by heart, but not from writing. And then that's the Tanakama, and he says that you can, it's okay if it's on the wall. So there you go, we have a Tana, in fact, that permits it explicitly on the wall. And that would make sense according to the opinion that says we're worried about erasing. And this must be a case where it's up high. Okay, so that first answer came in handy after all.
Why do we assume it's up high?
It doesn't say up high in the Baraita. We're going to prove it now that it has to be. Well, what does it help if it's on the wall? If it's low down, you're still going to erase it. So it must be that it's up high, otherwise it wouldn't make sense. Right? So it's useful, that thing that we said before. And that Rabba, although it's true, Rabba said that even in that case wouldn't be allowed, but since we have the Bi'acha was matir, so here now we have a practical case where it could be totally allowed. But one reason, but not allowed according to the other reason. Okay, now similar case. There's a parallel machloket to Tanya. Very interesting law. You're not allowed to look in a mirror on Shabbat. You ever heard this halacha? If it's fixed onto the wall, then you're allowed to look at the mirror. What could be the problem? What's the difference? If it's on the wall, so the problem is you're going to look at the mirror, you're going to see some hair, some long hair or hair out of place, and you're going to want to cut it. So if the mirror is on the wall, then you're going to see it. By the time you go and get a scissor, then come back, you'll remember it's Shabbat. Right, that doesn't make sense. Even if it's portable, okay, so you say take the mirror, you see it. You may be taking the mirror with you, but still you're going to walk and go to get the scissor. You'll remember in the meantime. So what's the difference? Oh, we're only talking about a mirror made out of metal. The problem with a mirror made out of metal is that you might look at the mirror, see I have a hair that needs cut, and take the mirror itself and use it to shave, right? Shaving mirror. And so that would be a problem on Shabbat, maybe even during the week if it's like a razor. And so therefore, you're not allowed to look in a metal mirror that is portable. If it's fixed to the wall, there's no problem because you're not going to take it off the wall to shave with it. Okay, so that's why you probably didn't hear of this halakha. It's only applies to a metal mirror, and I think our mirrors are made out of glass. So, we're okay. Tenor banan. כתב המהלך תחת הסורה ותחת הדיוק נאות, אסור לקראתו בשבת. One is not allowed to read writing under a picture or a diokna has the word icon in it, right? Icon and image. You go to a museum and you see a little placard under the painting. You're not allowed to read that placard because then that will lead to reading business letters. Maybe it has names in it, and you can remember a name and things like that. So similar to the reason in the Mishnah. By the way, the icon, the idol itself, even during the week, you're not allowed to look at it. It says, don't turn to the gods. It means don't turn to them in worship. But the Talmud expands on that and reads El a little differently and says, do not push God out of your head. And by looking at the idol, you're now concentrating on something else. Okay. Next part of the Mishnah says, Mefis Adam im banav, you can make a lottery with your family members for dinner. Im banav im beto in b'macher la. So we can infer that it says family members, you're only allowed to do this with your own family members. But if you're getting together with friends or anyone else, you're not allowed to make a lottery to decide who gets which part. Remember that, we're going to refer to this again later. If you have a group of people and each one is very particular with each other, in other words, they're not going to be generous and say whatever, just like the people you go out with and then you get the bill and they say, oh, well, I ordered, 2 Cokes and you only ordered 1, so you have to add another $1, right? So people who are very particular with each other, and then, they're looking out at, you got a bigger piece and I got a smaller piece, and if they would make a lottery together, Ovrin mishum midam, mishum mishkal, mishum minyan, mishum lovin, uparin beyom tov. If they would do this on a holiday or on Shabbat, since they're so particular about exacting, they would be violating measuring, right? Measuring of all different types is prohibited on Yom Tov and Shabbat, and from counting and from borrowing, right? Because and repaying, because you say, okay, I'll take this part and I'll pay you back later. So since they're so calculating in their measurements, they're not allowed to do that. Even the debit, right? Because they're gonna say, "Oh, give me that piece now," and they're gonna end up returning something else that's more expensive later on, and come to the beat. So that's why people who are not family members cannot do this. However, how about family members? So say that also with family members, they're going to be measuring each one, once a particular piece. No, very interesting halacha that a family member, a father, is allowed to lend money to his kids with interest. Why? So that they should feel the pain of paying interest. And they'll learn, right, how bad interest is. Well, how is that allowed? I thought you're not allowed to lend with interest. In this case, it's talking about kids who are still dependent on their father. So really all their money is their father's anyway. So it's not really charging interest because you're just giving money to the kids and it's still your money. And so they're paying you back more money that's also your money. So it doesn't really make a difference, right? And so that's allowed. So similarly, since in the father or family is giving out the food, they're all sharing from the same bank account. And so everything that they have is shared. So it doesn't matter if you have a little more this time and I say, oh, I want the bigger piece next time. All of those calculations and borrowings are, since they're all one fund, it's not considered monetary transaction. So if so, then the father should also be allowed to do big portions and small portions. And the Mishnah said they could do a lottery, but they can't give out purposely big and small portions. So why not? Why can't he also give out big and small portions? Because it's not monetary transaction. We say, indeed, you're right. And we're going to reword the Mishnah. There's some words missing in the Mishnah. And this is how you have to read it. Sometimes chasura means this is how you have to explain it. And sometimes it's saying you have a wrong girsah, and then you have to add these words. And this is how you should recite it. You're allowed to make a lottery with your family members and even give out one big one and one small one and do all that. And we follow that what he said, Rav, who said, you can even lend your kids on interest because it's all one fund. They're all sharing the same money. So it's not a business transaction. Yes, with your family members, you could do everything, but with others, you can't do anything. Right? That's the statement he said before. That would be like measuring and borrowing and repaying on Shabbat, and so that's all monetary transactions because it's different funds, different pocketbooks, and everybody is very particular about if you got 2 cents more of chicken. And if you're doing it even during the week, if you have it within the lottery, some people get a big piece, some people get a small piece. It could be fun. You share a meal together. And, only one person is going to get a nice big dessert, right? Who's going to get it? Well, you can't do that because that is gambling, right? Because the person that gets it, and everybody else who have to pay in to the meal equally, they're going to feel bad. They're going to feel like he stole it from them, and so this would all be a form of stealing, and like gambling, like gambling with a cube. Okay, so that's really, really fascinating. You get a sense of how when food is scarce, and then people are would be very particular about it, how big the piece of food that they got is. Okay, matilin halashin. So then the end of the Mishnah says that the Kohanim draw lots for the different parts of the sacrifices. Why does it say, but not on other portions? What other portions? That they can't make a lottery on portions of regular food that from Hall, maybe from something yesterday, and they can't do that on Yom Tov. Pishita, of course they can't do that. I mean, no one is allowed to do that. We just said any strangers, not family members, cannot. Why? Oh, we would have thought it's okay because in Hosea says, you people are like quarrelsome priests. In other words, the Kohanim were known to be quarrelsome. I guess because they're all constantly sharing things and competing with each other. So since it says they're always quarrelsome, we might have thought that maybe it's a good idea that they do a lottery all week long for everything that they eat. This comes to teach us, no. It's only allowed for hekdesh, food, because that shows their zeal to do the mitzvah. But for regular food, where there's no mitzvah, then they'll get into all the problems before of like ribit. This is Yaakov. He's named after his grandfather Yaakov, right? And mentions his mother in between. Okay, now we get to Agadah. Really fascinating Agadah. It says anyone who someone is punished because of him, he cannot enter into God's chamber. What does it mean? Well, let's look at the example. Okay, there's a famous story about Ahab, right, the evil king, that he wanted to go out to war with Ramoth Gilad, and he didn't know if he should do it or not, so he gathers together 400 Nevi'im, and the 400 Nevi'im say, go and fight. And he goes and fights, and he gets mortally wounded in battle. Okay, so what happened here? So the prophet Michaihu comes and says, here's what happened up in heaven. This is in Tanakh, right? It says, Hashem says, who is going to entice Ahab to sin, to fall? And each one is giving different stratagems until the Ruach Sheker, right? A deceitful spirit comes and says, I have an idea. I will put a false spirit of prophecy among his prophets, and they will give him bad advice. So it's interesting. That means those 400 prophets really did receive prophecy, but that the prophecy planted was purposely bad advice in order to get him to go do a stupid idea and fight, and that way he will get killed in the battle. Okay, and now the Gemara is going to expound. Who is this Ruach? Right? Which one? Who is this Ruach Sheker? Amar Rabbi Yochanan zerucho shel Navot. Navot, remember him? Navot owned a piece of land right next door to King Ahab, and King Ahab says, "Oh, I would wish I had that land so I can expand my garden." And he wouldn't sell to him because it was his ancestral land. And so, with the help of his evil wife Izebel, they trumped up charges against Navot and had him executed and his land confiscated. So, right, Navot was a victim of a terrible, terrible crime by Ahab. So that evil spirit was that of Navot. It says, I know, I'll go and trick him. So Umaiseh, when Hashem says go, in other words, go out and do your mission, right? Which sounds like God is accepting. Reads it as a negative. It says, get out of my base, get out of my chamber. And so what you see here is that Navot, although he was a victim, but because he was the reason, he caused the punishment to Ahab, who deserved the punishment. He is the cause of the punishment, and therefore he gets punished himself, right? So, like, well, what is this about? Why are we blaming a victim? I'm trying to think of an analogy. Maybe it's like, if there's two competitors in the stores in business, and one of the stores opens during coronavirus against the law, right? and he's selling to people inside and whatever. And the other store owner then calls the authorities to close him down, right? And so the person that called, well, why is he doing it? Is he doing it because he's really interested in public safety? Well, would he do it otherwise? Or is it because he wants to attack his competition, right? And so too here, although Ahav deserved punishment, but Navot was not bringing his suggestion out of a sense of justice, but rather out of a sense of personal malice and revenge. And therefore, although what he did was just, and God actually agreed with it, I think we learn from here that the motivation also counts. Reminds me in the execution of Eichmann, in the Eichmann trial, the Israeli government did not want a victim of the Holocaust to be the executioner. That the person doing executing shouldn't be doing it out of personal malice, and so they picked a Sephardi guy who was not in Germany at all to be, the objective hand of strict justice. Okay, so I think that's saying something like that. Anyway, we have the statement of Rabbi Yaakov, and so we want to know the source. Is this the source, this story? And then we reject this particular example. Maybe the reason that Hashem kicked Nabot, the spirit of Nabot, out is because he was a spirit of falsehood. And even though in this case it worked and it was a useful ploy to get Ahav to do this evil thing, still falsehood is bad no matter what. And so falsehood cannot remain in the same chamber as HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He had to be kicked out. So that's a simpler reason, not necessarily because of your reason, Rabbi Yaakov. So rather, we want to find a different example of where the causer of punishment himself gets punished. You are filled with shame instead of honor. Drink, you also, uncircumcised one. Really, it's a verb, and become uncircumcised. Sabata kalon mikabod. Who is this referring to? This is Nebuchadnezzar, right? That he got shame instead of honor. Shete gamata ve'arel. This Sidkiah, who's like who gets punished right along with him. So that's the idea that Sidkiah, although Sidkiah is really the victim, right? But in a way, he caused Nebuchadnezzar by Sidkiah, by rebelling and by sinning, he caused Nebuchadnezzar to have to come and punish him. And then Nebuchadnezzar in turn gets punished himself. So there's a mutual destruction here. Okay, we reject this. First of all, this whole pasuk we could read as referring to Nebuchadnezzar. Sidkiah was Sadiq. What could he do? He didn't do anything so bad. Because we have a tradition that trails off. We're going to read the whole thing later. He said when Nebuchadnezzar was trying to molest all the Sidkiah. We'll see the rest of the story in a minute. Okay, so in other words, Sidkiah here was simply the victim, and he didn't cause anyone to get punished, and so that's not a good example. Finally, we have a good example. Even punishing for a Sadiq is not good. In other words, it's not even good for a Sadiq to give punishment. Even though it's a just punishment, it's still not good. And lo tov ela ra. Right? Lo tov means ra. Uchtiv ki lo el hafes le'esha ata lo yigurecha ra. Sadiq ata Hashem velo yagur b'megurecha ra. And from the last section, evil will not lie with you. And evil includes even a righteous person who gives punishment. So causing punishment, although it could be just and deserved, still has consequences. Okay, it's like, why should that happen? I don't know, maybe we can understand kind of psychologically, way jailers or people that are regularly in execution, or can actually have depraving effect on the person himself. Okay. מה משמע דהי חלשים לשנה דפורהו? Okay, now we finished with the Nebuchadnezzar. We're going to come back in a second. But remember that very end of the Mishnah, David's question was, what does this halashim mean? How does it mean lottery? This is the one that the Kohanim do. הכתיב איך נפלת משמיים הלל בן שחר נגדעת לארץ חולש על גויים וגומל. Pasuk in Yeshaya, how have you fallen, day star, son of morning, been cut down to the ground, holesh al goyim, casting lots over the nations. So here you go, you have a word holesh, meaning casting lots. Oh, this is perfect because it happens to explain the Mishnah, but also leads right back into another Agadah about Nebuchadnezzar. So this is all like perfectly placed and weaves back and forth in a beautiful way. אמר רבא בר רב הונא מלמד שהיה מטיל פור על גדולי מלכות לידה איזה בן יומו אשר משכב זכור. Nebuchadnezzar, he went and conquered, country after country, and he captured all their kings, and he would make a lottery which king to rape on each day. וכתיב כל מלכי גויים כולם אמר רבי יוחנן שנחו ממשכב זכור. And when it says later in Yeshaya that all the kings of the nations sleep in glory, everyone in his own house, that's when finally this terrible incident finished.
Rabbi, did the Hachamim generally read Yeshaya into later time periods, like Nebuchadnezzar? Because he's in Yeshaya's Assyrian period.
Yeshaya's earlier. Oh, I mean, how could he? Okay, right. How could Yeshaya be talking about something happened later?
100 years later, 100 plus years later.
Right. Okay. Good. Yeah. Very, very good point. Okay, it is definitely an anachronistic midrash, and maybe this shows that the rabbis don't really think that Yeshaya had this in mind, but rather this is an application of his prophecy. But it does remind us of what we find in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Pesher type of interpretation, right? Where this was very common in the second Bet HaMikdash literature, where people would take up some Pisukim, usually from Nevi'im, and apply them to their own times. And they thought that the Pesher writers of the Dead Sea sect thought that the Nevi'im really weren't writing about their own time at all. They didn't even know the impact of what they were writing. They were actually talking about the end of days, which was they thought was applying to their own time. So this is in some way similar. But I'm imagining if we asked Rabbi Yochanan, what he meant by this, he would not say this is the only interpretation that it applies to the future, but that rather that Yeshaya was primarily talking about his own generation, but all of these prophecies have an additional application to future times.
I'm wondering why they wanted to specifically apply it to Nebuchadnezzar instead of applying it to one of the Assyrian kings. Is there something about Nebuchadnezzar that they wanted to just portray him this way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Good question. Okay. אסור לעמוד בביתו של אותו רשע, שנאמר, ושעירים ירקדו שם. One is prohibited to stand in the ruins of Nebuchadnezzar. Not sure, I guess maybe they knew where they were. That's a good question. If you go find his ruins, can you go in, as an archaeological site and check it out? I'm sure it's been destroyed, so maybe that would be okay. Okay, so as demons shall dance there, as Yeshaya says, so therefore not a good idea to go there, it would be dangerous. אמר רבי יהודה אמר רב, בשעה שביקש אותו רשע לעשות לאותו צדיקך, נמשכה עורלתו 300 אמה, והייתה מחזרת על כל המסיבה כולה, שנאמר, שבע אתה קלון מכבוד, שתה גם אתה והערל. This pasuk that we saw before, הערל בגימטריה 300 הווה. When Nebuchadnezzar wanted to do this terrible act to Sidkiah, his orla stretched 300 amot, some kind of grotesque surreal type of scene. So we can psychoanalyze that later. And how do we know why 300? Because that's Arel and Gematria is 300. אמר רב יהודה אמר רב, בשעה שירד אותו רשע לגיהנם, רעשו כל יודעי גיהנם. Even when he died and he went down to Gehenna, he was still causing havoc. People down in Gehenna said, Amru Shema l'mshol alehem hu ba. They said, now he's coming here, now he's going to rule over us here in Gehenna. It's bad enough that we're in hell, we have to be under the rule of Nebuchadnezzar, who was so evil. Or is he going to come and be weak and lie down like everybody else there? It says you become like us. Therefore, he's going, although he rules in this world, Nebuchadnezzar will suffer the same fate as everybody else. Yes, bat kol v'amira mimi na'omta reda vehoshkeba et arelim. Right? Who do you pass in beauty go down and be laid with uncircumcised? So in other words, Nebuchadnezzar, he's called the uncircumcised one, and so everybody goes and has the same status there. And just 3 more lines. Shabbat noges, Shabbata madheba. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav, Shabbata umazo, Shamra medod vehabe. So Shabbat rested this nation, right? There was an oppressing nation. It ceased extracting madheba. Madheba means gold, and so we make a play on words that this nation had said medod vehabe, measure and bring a lot of money, measure and bring more money. That they always were collecting more money. They kept saying, bring more. That's what the word madheba means. Me'od habe. Finally, urbu yatira husfat li. This is Daniel. Surpassing greatness was added unto me, Nebuchadnezzar says. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Yirmiyah Amar Abba melamed shelachav al arizachar lekasher tanin ברושו. לכמה שנאמר, וגם את חיית השדה נתתי לו לעבדו. Nebuchadnezzar was able to do this amazing feat. He could ride on a lion and use a snake as its reins. He was able to conquer all the beasts of the field. And so perhaps the lion that he's riding represents Yehuda, was compared to a lion, and a serpent is often compared to Egypt, which he was able to conquer all of these nations. And so, although he rose to this greatness, he suffers a terrible end. And we'll end with that as well.